Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast that takes place with leading scientists and industry professionals to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. Hi, I'm Scott Sorrell. I'm going to be your host here tonight, and I've got not one, but three co-hosts that's going to be joining me. We've got Dr. Corwin Nelson from the University of Florida. Corwin, would you mind starting off? Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm an associate professor in animal sciences here at the University of Florida. I've been here for 11 years now. It's hard to believe, almost 12. So my my primary area of research is vitamin nutrition and physiology. For the last year, I've had a somewhat interesting role in taking on management of our dairy farm. So thankfully, we have a new manager there now, and ready to go with that, and I can get away to do this kind of things again.
Yeah, good. And this is not your first trip to the pub, so welcome back. I should have stated that before. All right. And we've got Dr. Brad Johnson here to my right, and this is now your third trip to the pub. It's been a long night, hasn't it?
I thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it. So.
Brad, would you mind just kind of telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Scott. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be involved in this. And so I'm currently a professor at Texas Tech University. I've been in that role for 17 years. Prior to that, I was on faculty at Kansas State University and South Dakota State University. So I grew up in South Dakota and did my training at South Dakota State University for my bachelor's and did a master's and PhD at the University of Minnesota in St. Paul.
And our final co-host, Dr. Tara Felix. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Also my third round,
Yeah, third year round as well.
My name is Tara Felix. I'm an associate professor at Penn State University, and I did a master's degree at Florida in trace mineral nutrition, Corwin, with Dr. Lee McDowell. Did a PhD at The Ohio State University with Steve Lurch and Francis Fluharty. Was on faculty at the University of Illinois, and then got a chance to go home to my native Pennsylvania about 9 years ago and take the position there as the beef cattle extension specialist at Penn State.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us again. And our featured guest this evening is Dr. Albert DeVries, also here at the University of Florida. He's going to be giving a talk later today at the Florida Ruminant Nutrition Symposium, and the title of that talk is Beef on Dairy, Economic Decision-Making on the Farm. Now, I want to let my audience know that this is the third and final of 3 podcasts that we've done on this subject. And so if you've not listened to the previous 2, please go back and do so, because they do kind of build on each other. So with all that, Dr. DeVries, welcome. This is your first time to the pub, so we appreciate having you here. Why don't you start off by telling us just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, Albert DeVries, and I'm as you said, I'm a professor here in the Department of Animal Sciences at UF. I've been here 23 years. I have an accent. I grew up on a small farm in the Netherlands and did graduate school at the University of Minnesota. So we're both Gopher grads there. And I dabble in management topics, decision making, adding value to that. So a lot of spreadsheets, modeling, and I'm interested in reproduction, genetics, and beef on dairy, obviously.
New research is changing everything we thought we knew about choline's impact on the cow and her calf, and top scientists have a lot to say about it. They are presenting new research that supports choline as a required nutrient to optimize milk production, choline as a required nutrient to support a healthy transition, choline as a required nutrient to improve calf health and growth, and choline as a required nutrient to increase colostrum quantity. This new research is solidifying choline's role as a required nutrient for essentially every cow, regardless of health status, milk production level, or body condition score. Learn more about the science that is changing the game and the choline source that is making it happen. Reassure precision-release choline from Balchem. Visit balchem.com/scientistsay to learn more.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about growing up in the Netherlands. Did you end up, where exactly was it, and did you end up at Wageningen at any point?
Yes, I did end up at Wageningen at any point. So I grew up on a small farm. I think when I left the farm to go to college, we had milked 50 cows. We had farrow to finished pigs as well. with laying hens when I was little. And Wageningen was a 50-minute bike ride from where I grew up. So that's what I did. I did animal science there, but part of that I did an internship at the University of Minnesota. And yeah, that really was interesting. And later had the opportunity to go back and do a PhD there. And after that, Florida invited me to apply for an opening they had, and I did. And the rest is history.
Yeah, I've met Ed van Vern there at Wageningen and Rosalinda Gosling.
Oh yeah, Rosalinda I know as well. Yeah. Many of the. So it's been a while since I graduated there, right? So some people have retired by now.
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So let's jump right into it. Why don't you just kind of give us an overview of your talk you're going to give here later today?
Yeah. So Corwin already alluded to. He's been managing the UF Dairy Farm for a year, and we've gone through some changes, and that led to an opportunity actually to implement beef on dairy at our own university. And I know we were not the first one, we're probably a later one, but that gives me, a lot of experience in how do you go through the decision-making aspect of beef on dairy. So we did what we're supposed to do. We put a partial budget together. We looked at semen cost. We looked at calf values. We looked at conception rates. We looked at increases in genetics. And then we came to the conclusion that it made a lot of sense to do beef on dairy. And then you move into implementation, a little bit of sire selection, and primarily also which heifers and which cows are we going to put dairy sex semen on. The remainder then we breed with beef semen. You have to do a lot of inventory planning. How many heifers do we want to make? What's our replacement rate going to be, or what is our goal there? And so we're sort of, we've implemented that. I think we're making money by doing that. But there's also a lot of additional things we can do to make this decision-making process better. And I will talk about that in my talk later today.
Okay, so I know that you guys, you genomic test every one of your cows, right, on the dairy. And can you talk a little bit about that and the role that is played in perhaps selecting the bulls that you put on those cows?
Yeah, so we do genomic tests as a matter of principle because we're a research university. We said, hey, we just need to do that, right? So there's not a particular faculty member that pays for that. So that really means that we have high reliable PTAs, on our heifers and our cows. And so part of our mating program is looking at the PTAs for net merit of heifers and cows to see which ones are candidate for sex semen, sex dairy semen, and which ones then go with beef semen. So yes, the PTAs net merit play a key factor in that.
And then how consistent is the genomics across your herd? We had talked previously today in a couple of conversations about the variation within the dairy herd, and I was kind of curious if you've been able to eliminate that or at least understand it here at Florida.
So, we get PTAs for net merit. We net merit as a key selection index. It's provides an economic estimate of course of the value of the dam, and therefore you have sires as well, and so you can with pretty high accuracy predict what the value of the heifers are, the dairy heifers that you're making. So I say one of the interesting thing that you run into when you do this practically is that sometimes the net merits that you see, in our case in our dairy comp, is not necessarily what's being published online. And so you go like, why these differences, for example? Sometimes there are files that don't get updated, right? You have to really be on top of your game because sometimes you're just breeding the wrong heifers and cows to sex semen because there was a mistake in the data there. So, of course, we try to keep an eye on that and fix that. And of course, because we're doing the genomic testing, I think we have a more accurate ranking of our top genetics in the herd, and therefore it makes sense that we're doing a little better job really mating our top genetics in the herd to dairy bulls.
I think to your I was going to say to your point there about the variation, and I haven't looked at our most recent results from the last animals that we had tested, because we test our heifer calves every few months that are born. If I recall right, our range is probably somewhere around 300 to 400 in net merit. So top animals over 1,000 to now our bottom animals are somewhere in that 700 range. I haven't looked at the most recent ones, but we're somewhere in there for what we have for our distribution.
Right, and so the distribution does not change a whole lot, right, with genomic testing. No, it's just a ranking. And of course, what we're really after is that now the PTA is a predicted number of her genetic merit, and we're really after her true genetic merit, right? And because of the higher reliability, you have a better correlation, and you have a better ranking in that regard.
So now I have two questions. So as the beef person, the token beef person, right, with Dr. Johnson on the panel, I'm really curious about this 1,000 to 700, what that number really means. Is that her, you talk about net merit. We don't ever talk about net merit.
Guessing that's all milk production driven, right? Milk yield components.
Yeah, that's interesting that you asked that, right, from the beef side, because it's so fundamental to the value of dairy genetics, right? That we.
I imagine we have some beef listeners, so that maybe are in the same boat I am.
So let me try to explain it, right? So the net merit is Council Dairy Cattle Breeding's, USDA's economic selection index, and it has, I don't know how many traits, maybe 17, 18 traits that all have on dairy cattle. So there's milk, there's fat, there's protein, there's productive life, there's fertility traits, there's somatic cell count, there's how big is the cow, there's early calving, traits that matter on cattle that have economic value. And then, so we have genetic estimates for them, how much, the PTA is basically how many more pounds of milk, how many more months of longer productive life, how much lower somatic cell score. And then all these PTAs are multiplied by a marginal value, like what is 1 pound of fat worth to a producer, right? What is 1 month longer staying in the herd worth to a producer? And we multiply all the PTAs of all these traits with their marginal economic values, and we get to a net merit value. So it's a lifetime profit estimate relative to an average cow in the national herd. I think the last we talked about cows born in 2015. Yeah. So if you talk about plus 1,000, then you're saying this animal. If you say a bull is, or even if you talk about, let's say a bull has a plus 1,000 net merit. That means his daughters, because the PTA really talks about the offspring, is expected to produce $1,000 more profit in her lifetime, 3 years really, life as a producing cow, compared to the average cow, I believe, born in 2015.
So with all that data, we need to really start capitalizing, coming up with maybe a new net merit specifically for beef production on these Holstein or Jersey cows. Is that something you think would be feasible?
Yeah, so we've always selected beef cattle dairy cattle for their ability to be dairy animals, right? So it is an interesting question. You say, hey, this is a dairy animal. She's not going to produce the next generation of dairy cattle, but she's good at producing a beef calf. Now, what traits on the dairy cow matter for the beef calf? And I think in the US we're not quite doing that, but I believe in Ireland they're looking at that, for example. Yeah, so why not? We probably need to move into a trait or two in the dairy world that we may put some value on, because half our dairy animals produce crossbred calves in the future, if not now. And so there's value there as well. So it's clearly something we have to work on.
So you said half, but really, with genomic tests in sex semen, it's maybe closer to 70% of the dairy animals that are getting bred to beef semen right now. Or is it not that high?
It's probably less set to dairy semen. So beef semen, right? So 70% perhaps, maybe 60%. It really depends a lot, I think, on the replacement rate that you're looking for in your herd. Yeah. So if I say 50, that is probably on beef. It's probably conservative. It may be a little higher number. Yeah.
And how are you selecting that beef semen? I mean, you just talk about net. Man, what a tremendous amount of data that go into net merit. How are you picking the beef sires that you're putting on your dairy cows?
Well,
Or how are the producers that you're
yeah,
working with
that's a
picking
great
the beef
question,
sires?
right?
Dr. Nelson goes into the semen tank and
You could probably tell where.
That turns out that not so well if you do that.
No.
I can tell you
hey,
that.
that's all
No.
education. That's what we're here for.
That's what we're here for, right? That's why we're interested in dairy and beef, right? We probably don't pay enough attention to picking our beef sires. And the reason is that, I think the primary reason is that the Florida market does not pay well for, or at all, for what beef bull are used to produce crossbred
Really?
calves. Yes. But clearly,
Well, I
think
think that's
the-
true of any market, though, right?
Yeah,
When you
without
go to an
data,
auction
yeah.
barn and you buy a sale
unknown.
barn calf, in Pennsylvania right now, I'm going to buy that calf at $1,000, whether his daddy was a top Angus bull in the nation or whether it was some knothead crossbred animal. So I think that's true of any state.
So you'd really be looking at things like calving needs and pregnancy rate of that bull.
So fertility still matters on the dairy cow.
Yep, you want a high conception rate bull and calving needs.
and low cost in this case. So
Low
we-
cost semen.
low cost on beef semen, yeah, and probably yes. Now on the dairy semen, low cost is not a winner, right? Because we cut too much down on our best genetics. But for
But
beef,
maybe we need to evolve the beef side to be just like that, where low cost is not the winner. Investing in high
Yes.
beef genetics
Yeah.
to improve beef on dairy crosses could be the best scenario.
could
So-
definitely be the best scenario. So if there was a value streaming back to our dairy, we'd love to pay a little more for beef semen. Of course, we got calculators to see if it makes if the extra cost.
So $1,000 day-old calf isn't enough value to move that barometer? I
Well,
mean,
but what he's saying, Brad, is right now it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah,
it
that's
doesn't
true. They're
matter
getting
whether you pay
$1,000,
$5
yeah.
for the
No, you're
straw or
right.
$25
getting
for the straw. You're
$1,000.
getting $1,000 for the calf. So the dairyman's not stupid. Pay $5
Yes.
for the straw.
Yeah. But $5 or $7, that doesn't make any difference really on large dairies. So, yeah, I know there's these premium programs, right? That you pay a little more extra for semen, and then you're being promised a little bit of bonus perhaps on the value of your calves and crossbred calves, and we haven't really jumped on that because we felt that sort of locks us in, and we weren't quite ready to be locked in at this point.
So, Corwin, you're calving ease and
Calving needs and fertility. Those are as long as we're getting that, we get a live calf in the end, and you get that. We're not getting $1,000 here. I wish we could get there, but
send them up to Pennsylvania. We'll pay you $1,000.
What would be the
you
average
get-
day-old cost in Florida, say, for a beef on dairy cross calf?
We're right at $800, somewhere in that range right now. So, it's continued to kind of creep up over time there.
And
so.
your estimate, Dr. DeVries, of what would be the cost that the average dairyman would have on that $800 day-old calf? Would they have $200 invested from a semen?
I mean, if the conception rate's good, and it takes 3 breedings to get her pregnant, 3 times $7, $21 there on semen, plus maybe a little bit of labor. Right? I mean, that is the out-of-pocket cost. That's quite low, of course. Yeah.
Pretty good net profit.
So in the scenarios that you've run, Brad asked about 60, 70%. I didn't realize we were up that high. What's the optimum? How many dairy animals should be bred to beef in our herd, and how many do we need to keep as those high PTA, high net merit heifers?
Yeah, that is, of course, it's a key question we're sort of all chasing, right? Because you have to first sort of figure out how many heifers do I need. And we got calculators for that says, hey, if I want to have a 35% replacement rate, you can then go back and says, well, how many, if I need to have 35 heifers, 35% replacement rate. At our dairy, we calculated we need about 15 heifers calving every month. Okay, but you're going to have losses right down the stream. So you have some non-completes, right? You have some dead on arrivals. So that means in order to get 15 heifers calving, you may need, I do this out of the top of my head now, 18 to 20 or so because of losses that you sort of need to have born, right? Because you're going to have some losses. And then you do more calculations, what's the conception rates and so that you have, what are the losses you get when the animal's pregnant but the dam is culled. And so you go through that math, and that will tell you then how many sex semen inseminations you would need on the dairy in order to get to that target of 15 heifers.
And how big's the dairy on campus, just to give us an idea of?
400 to 450.
Okay, so 20 heifers a month for a 450 cow.
Yeah, 15. And at that point, we milked a few more cows, so we calculate 15. Part of that too is that you can raise more heifers, and a lot of producers, I think, raise more heifers because they're afraid to be short. But that also means, on average, you're going to have a higher replacement rate than you really think you need, right? Because most folks rather have more heifers than not enough. And of course, with today's heifer prices, that probably makes sense. So
it's a really interesting scenario that we have out there right now in the dairy world too, because these beef calf prices are so high. The dairyman is looking at, well, I get this much for that beef calf. How much is it really worth to have that dairy heifer to breed to have another dairy heifer? At the same time, we've seen this, our heifer replacement numbers are at historic lows.
We had that discussion driving up from Orlando, and that's got to be, that's got to be a interesting modeling exercise, because the value of these calves are so high that they're sitting there thinking, oh, maybe I don't need as many heifers, right? And so,
if somebody told us 4 years ago that we could sell heifers at $4,000 a piece, we'd bred the whole herd to sex semen, right? Obviously. But you don't know. So part of that is you have to sort of estimate what the market is. 2 years plus 9 months.
So that's a value right now. A bred heifer's worth $4,000.
Yeah, I've seen those prices too.
So the last time I looked at and this is our Pennsylvania numbers, our extension group puts together the cost of heifer rearing. It was around $2,800. Is that still a good kind of an average cost? So point being, are you getting a $1,200 net profit by raising that heifer up versus the $800 you're getting for that day-old bull calf at this point?
Yeah, I'd say it's that number of 28 to, so anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000, maybe upwards of that too. It depends on the area where you can do it. But yeah, that's a pretty good estimate, somewhere in that ballpark for raising that heifer.
I think we raise our heifers in Kansas now, and we spent maybe $2,500 when it's all said and done. Huh?
It's closer to 28 once you figure in trucking and doing all that. So yeah.
So it's your industry that drives this. And where I'm going with all that is Dr. Johnson and I have built our careers for the last 5 years focused on beef on dairy animals. Are we going to have beef on dairy animals to raise after this, or are y'all going to switch and breed more heifers?
I think it'll be an interesting balance. I don't expect you'll see major shifts taking place because those beef prices are so yeah, right? You got a calf. So at the same time, producers are saying, dairymen are saying, we have to be raising some more heifers, but they're not going to throw everything in to start doing that. And so I think it'll be a balance that takes place over time of finding where's that number for us, and you'll see some push and shove take place. That's where I expect to see.
Yeah, but it will be sex and beef going forward, right? I don't really see much of a role of conventional dairy. You're just gambling. Why would you do that, right? And now whether it's 60% beef or it ought to be 50%, okay. We'll probably tweak that a little bit over time, depending on prices.
One thing that's always, I always try to learn something from your industry, that maybe some positives or negatives that are kind of low-hanging fruit from a research question. And I've always been intrigued by longevity of the milking cow. It seems to be getting shorter and shorter. I don't even know what the average lactation is, but it's probably less than 2, right? And
it's about, I think USDA uses about 2.6
okay,
lactations,
less than 3.
but it has come down a little bit.
So one way, to offset the need for more heifers is if we could just improve longevity. Is some of your modeling work, Dr. DeVries, have you looked at, I got to believe cow longevity could be a huge huge factor from a dairy profitability.
You published that paper in 2020 about longevity, and now I'm curious.
Yeah, the longevity is it's a fascinating problem, right? Because you talk about acid replacement, right? So I believe it's not true that cows just leave when they can't produce milk anymore, they quit to be fertile. Producers cull cows because there's better cows in the herd. It is a competitive business that they're in, right? And so we have genetically, we've bred a year longer productive life in cows in the last 30 years or so. They clearly can't stay longer. So if you put today's cows into the herds of the 1970s, they all stay a lot longer, I believe, right? And so we're getting into the business of decision making. And I think part of why we've seen somewhat of a shorter productive life is because we might have made too many dairy heifers, is what one would say. And they have to push out cows there because, there's a limited amount of space. Now, there's also the counter argument that we've hang on to perhaps some cows too long. And if we had heifers, if we should have had more heifers and get rid of our low-producing cows. So somewhere there is this balance there of what is the right replacement rate. I don't believe that necessarily all cows have to deserve to stay longer. And I also don't believe necessarily that if we did everything right, that therefore productive life is going to be a year longer than what it is today. So heifers cost maybe $2,800. What do we get for cull cows today?
We're getting anywhere from maybe $1,800 to up to $2,000.
Yeah. And these are not the best cows that we sell, right? So if we'd sold them a few months earlier or so, maybe there's a few $100s there. So you're looking at
thank
the
the
gap.
beef guys on this side of the table for that high hamburger
Yeah,
price.
thank you very much. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yes. Yeah.
But there's a lot to that. What adds to this whole thing is the suppressed numbers of beef cows that are out there right now, and so that's just putting it out there. So I asked you this question, I don't know, maybe a year ago, Albert. It's like, Albert, we need more cows here. And you said, well, the fastest way to get that is to retain cows longer, right? So cows that we maybe normally get rid of, say, well, let's keep them in the herd. So that's the quickest way you can increase your herd number. Well, then you're at the question of, well, what's that cow really worth? If we can send her to market right now and get $1,800 for her, and you risk something happening to that cow, well, so you're faced with that question then too. How much is that cow truly worth?
Well, and that's why our numbers haven't rebounded on the beef side, right? Our beef cow-calf producers are faced with that exact same question. And I was with a group of producers Wednesday and Thursday nights in Pennsylvania, and they told me, Dr. Felix, I don't care what you're saying about beef calf prices. I took my cows the other day. I got $1.78 for my cows. Well, if I can sell my cow, there was a time when we couldn't imagine fat prices at $1.78. Now I'm selling my cows for that. Yeah, we're not going to retain a lot on the beef side either.
And in fact, we haven't been keeping heifers like we thought we would because the value of these feeder cattle are so high. So
yeah. And so it's difficult on the dairy side, right? Because we make breeding decisions now, how much sex, how much beef, and we got to go through 9 months of pregnancy, and it takes us 2 years before they're becoming cow. We can't really predict at all, right? What prices are and how many heifers we need and so on. So we would just have to predict what is sort of long-term average, but we cannot just say today, heifer prices are very high, therefore they're going to be very high 3 years from now. I think that'd be a little naive, probably. A lot of uncertainty in that regard as far as production planning goes.
We had a question in a previous podcast about should a dairy farmer feed his calves or should he go ahead and sell them? Have you done any modeling around that?
I'll tell you for myself, if I can get $800 for that calf, I want it gone. Somebody else take that risk. I don't want that risk.
Yeah, I think so too, at this point, at least in our market here.
do you get those questions from dairymen here in Florida?
I think dairymen are certainly thinking about that. What is it more profitable for me to take on raising that calf and getting it? So I'm sure those questions are being asked. Yes.
Yeah, this question about retaining ownership and so on, right? And we don't get a lot of questions. At least I don't, and perhaps because there's a little bit of math that they can do themselves, right? How much money do I put in there? What's the added value to the calf? a little bit of a risk that she, the calf dies, for example. Perhaps that math is not too complicated, and we live in a world of, very professional producers here in the Southeast, and they've probably done that math themselves, yeah.
We did a series of surveys. Well, the industry, did a series of surveys. One was done at California, one at Wisconsin, and then we did one in the Northeast with Yukon. And all of our survey data of dairy producers would show exactly that it's a risk return. And this was even in the early days before we were getting $800 to $1,000 for them, right? It's the risk benefit scenario. And so most of our calves are those surveys would suggest most of our calves are leaving early from the dairy.
And I believe that our producers are mostly in the dairy business. If you can sell that calf for a good price, then.
I mean, we've seen more of a shift just to raising our replacements, just like we've done. We raise our replacements elsewhere, right? We contract that out. And that's because you have somebody that's a specialist in raising calves, and they're set up, and they can do it so much more economically than we can. You look at if you're buying 50-pound bag of milk replacer versus that's produced in bulk right on site. It's typical dairy producer can't compete with that mode of operation that way.
So, Dr. Nelson, you said that earlier. So you're shipping day-old heifers to Kansas, or are they
week-old? Yeah.
So you're not doing any calf hut. You don't have anything in the hutches then.
Correct. We once they're eligible, we send out a load once a week, and so we're not the only ones.
You bring them back when they're springing? Are they ready to calve?
Yep, at about 200 to 220 days pregnant.
And that is very common in the Southeast. We're just basically following what everybody else does here. There's not a lot of heifers being raised in the Southeast anymore.
Yeah. You can do it so much more economically out in areas where the environmental conditions are much better. They have the forages there. There's not a competition for space, and they can do it much less expensive than we can.
So with that said, then the beef calf, the male calves historically, that what you're saying, Dr. DeVries, is the Florida dairy industry. On the dairies, there'd be very little opportunity to house calves. They're used to shipping. So even the beef on dairy calves are probably getting shipped off as day-olds as well.
Yeah, I think so. Within a week or so.
Yeah, a lot of these farms, there's somebody there to pick the large ones. They're picking up once a day.
And are there large calf ranches in Florida, or are they all getting shipped back to the Central Plains? And
as far as beef, there's not large calf ranches in Florida. Georgia might have a bit more, but as far as for beef, they're sent to either Texas, Kansas, out in the plains there.
What percent of your dairy farmers in Florida, Georgia, this area, is actually practicing the beef on dairy?
Oh, that's a good question. What I know is all the large producers are doing this. So I bet I'd be surprised if it's less than 80% of the cows.
And is it's a no-brainer decision?
Yeah, it's a no-brainer decision. Yeah. I have not seen any math that says don't do this.
I was just going to ask, you talk about the math. A while ago, Victor Cabrera had done that, the break even on a beef on dairy calf. What do you have to get for a beef on dairy calf to make it pay? And maybe that's where your question earlier came from, Brad. But I'm curious, have you done those break evens recently? We're sitting here on the beef side going, doggone dairies, all these expensive calves, right? But what's the break even on these calves reality? And in asking that, I'm wondering, how far can we tax this market, right? How far can we push it when beef prices start to come back down, because it's a cycle and they will come down.
Yeah. So I haven't done any break-evens lately, but I could. So on our dairy, when we did some budgeting for this, transitioning from just conventional dairy, all dairy, to beef on dairy, I concluded that's about $150 an advantage per cow per year, and that is extra semen cost, but higher calf value. And on top of that, you get $50 per cow per year because you're now sourcing your dairy heifers from your best for your best cows.
So you spread that across the entire dairy. That's worth $50 a head.
The genetics there for $50 a cow.
That's interesting. You put that in your model. I would have never thought to I mean, that's an interesting concept because you're sourcing genomically superior heifers. You're able to get $50 or less for all the other calves. Or, well, you could because you got a $50 net value from that heifer, that genomically tested heifer coming in.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's because her dam, her mother, was a heifer or was a high genetic value cow, right? Where if you do conventional semen, you gamble, and you have some heifers that come out of low genetic cows, and you say, well, I need the heifers, so I'm going to raise them, or I'm not looking. And there's a big spread really in genetics. We talked about the genomic testing being between a $400 PTA spread, and so PTA on the calves. So the PTA is what is transmitted to the next generation because it comes out of the sire world, right? Bulls were interested in their daughters, but if you genomically test calves and you say I have a $400 spread in PTA, you really have to look at the breeding value of those calves, and you really have to multiply the PTAs by 2 to talk about what is the calf's breeding values. That is their own genetics, instead of they only transmit half to the next generation. So now we're talking about $800 spread, right? And that's big differences, really. If you look at like 3 years that the cow produces milk, an $800 difference, wow, yeah, we better pay attention.
I was going to tie back to this genomic testing, and you asked a question earlier of, well, are we selecting the best bulls, Angus, or whether it's Angus or that's a common one, so I give that, but are we selecting the best beef sires for these crosses? And I think we are missing out on a big opportunity in finding this, and you think of the massive opportunity is that we can trace all these calves. Now, have we been doing that? Not necessarily, but we have the opportunity to really trace all these calves and have immaculate records on how they performed all the way through from that pre-weaning period, transition phase, up to the feedlot period, to the carcass quality. Brad, is your specialty there. And so you could track all that all the way through and really know here's what we could have the potential to do from selecting these optimum beef sires. So I know there's been some work on there, but I don't think we've really capitalized on that opportunity yet. But it'll become more and more common, I think, where some of the dairy producers are starting to, maybe they don't retain ownership of that calf, but they do partner with somebody who will be able to track that performance of that animal all the way through. And you'll then eventually have, these are the animals that do much better as far as particular liver abscesses, right? So minimizing that, so knowing the history of those calves and being able to determine what actually will decrease the incidence of those liver abscesses.
Yeah, and then we'll start paying more attention to the beef sires, right? Because we had that question earlier. So right now we basically rely on our AI companies to sell us decent bulls, beef bulls, right, with high fertility and calving age for a decent price, and we're a little bit indifferent really what bulls they are. On the dairy side, we pay a little better attention there. We really go through the bulls that are available, and we want, to be, at least to meet some minimum on some individual traits, and then we're looking really for a high net merit, typically there, yeah.
What about some other technology? I'll share some data later today. Especially, I don't know how many, you probably don't have a lot of Jersey cows here in Florida, but I mean, in different parts of the country, the Jersey influence is real. And obviously, from a beef production standpoint, they probably have the lowest red meat yield potential of any breed, right? So have you seen any newer technology like in vitro fertilized beef embryos going into either Jersey or Holsteins, and how the economics of that? Obviously, it costs more to do that. The question always arises then, Dr. Nelson, you brought up fertility on the dairy side, right? So, conception rate is a big thing. But do you think there's future opportunities? If we put an all-beef embryo in a Jersey cow, obviously then you've taken away the maternal genetics, and there's huge potential from a value of that calf, but it comes at a cost potentially. I didn't know if you had done any modeling on that or not. So.
Yeah, So I've done modeling on this, like many things. I've done some modeling at some point. So I think the cost of the embryo transfer is a little bit prohibitive, perhaps at this time. I'm not sure what's being charged, but way back when I looked at maybe $150 per transfer, and that just was too high. But if you can bring this, I don't know, but it takes 3 transfers, right? Maybe to get the calf there. So if, say it was $80 and I have $240 in there, what is then the extra value of that purebred calf that I get out of this dairy cow?
These large embryo companies are saying $40 to $50 per transfer. If that's real, I don't know. But then you're at, say, $150 for 3 of them. So
then becomes attractive, right?
Yeah.
I understand that not everybody can put embryos in cows, so you need to have the right technicians. But yeah, I think if we get better at putting embryos in cows at cheaper cost, then I think I can see that as just the next phase we're moving into, yeah.
Do you think, Brad, that the calf raisers that are going to auction and buying those day-old calves would pay $150 more when they're at $800 to $1,000 already for a purebred beef calf that they still have 5% death loss? And
I think if that model's going to work, and I've said this to other groups, we mentioned earlier we need to start partnering, right? They're not going to go to an auction market. Hopefully, if we got that much genetics invested and dollars invested, hopefully we can track those, and they all get the EIDs on day one, right? So hopefully we can form relationships with calf ranches and then ultimately feedlots and ultimately the packers to add value. And I've always thought the Jersey dairy producers would be the ones that would embrace this all beef embryo transfer the most. And I think in general they have. The ones that have tried it have been Jersey producers probably. So
I mean, they were first to embrace the crossbreeding, so
exactly,
that just makes
exactly.
sense. I worry, though, our industry, and maybe this is my pessimism shining through this morning, but I always jokingly refer to the beef industry as a disintegrated industry, right? Like we lack the integration that you're talking about to drive that success. And I think beef cattle producers in general really pride themselves on their individuality. And so I'm with you. It would take the relationships. Who builds those relationships and who gets that started?
So, but you're getting into an interesting problem here, right? So say embryo transfer of purebred beef embryos in dairy is economically feasible, right? Then can the dairy producer produce these purebred beef calves much cheaper than the purebred beef industry could?
That's an interesting concept, and in fact,
$1,000 to carry a cow.
in fact, you go out in the Central Valley of California, there are some large dairy producers that have become purebred beef producers. One in particular is probably one of the largest genetic providers in the beef industry now, but using dairy cows as an incubator to produce purebred sire, say Angus sires. And so there's a large outfit in the Panhandle of Texas that have been doing it, and there's a large group in California. So conceivably, we could produce a lot of purebred beef genetics using the dairy cow as an incubator, so to speak. So
It'd be interesting to put into your model. So last year, the national average cow costs, annual cow costs, so annual input costs of cow-calf operation were over $1,000. When you look at the lifespan of that beef cow, we had a conversation earlier about longevity. It typically takes me about 6 years for that to recoup my investment on that beef cow, right? So now if I can put that calf in a dairy system, is it cheaper? Probably, simply because I have an additional in-stream, profit in-stream on that cow, right? Versus the beef system. The question is, we only have 9 million dairy cows. We're not making more dairy cows necessarily. That can't be our entire beef cattle industry in the United States.
Right, 9 million dairy cows and then 40% or so have to make a dairy calf, right, to sustain ourselves. So clearly the quantities is not there, right, if it has to come just out of dairy.
We had a conversation on the earlier podcast, which again, we keep encouraging people, listen to these podcasts in order, right? We had a conversation on the earlier podcast about productivity and how that factors into your definition of sustainability and food insecurity issues and those kinds of things. Maybe, but on the second podcast, Dr. Johnson also talked about the fact that those really top-notch beef on dairy calves are producing similar quantities of red meat yield as those native beef calves. And so then the question becomes, okay, well, then is it worth the IVF if we can if we get away from just breeding for calving ease and just breeding for, is it worth the additional IVF costs and potential stress on the cow? I think, one of the things we haven't touched on yet on this podcast is, or the series is, we constantly have to consider what this looks like from the outside too, right? We're having all these very academic discussions, but what's best for the dairy cow in this scenario? What does animal well-being look like from the outside, and how do we address that as an industry in a manner that we can stand up and be proud?
So Tara, maybe you know something about that, right? Whether a dairy cow produces a dairy calf or a crossbred calf or so.
Is there any negative? Have you uncovered any negatives, say, of breeding, mass breedings of dairy cows to beef semen? Early on, people were worried about subsequent lactation drag. They always talked about the fertility issue, but have you seen any difference in milk production, subsequent milk production, if a dairy cow is incubating a F1 beef Holstein cross versus 100% Holstein? Is there any hint of any negative side from a milk production or fertility on the dairy side? So
our data would say no. I guess the question that our data didn't answer, and where I think maybe you guys having this model at the university might be able to eventually answer, is back to that longevity question, right? We didn't see any changes in milk production. We didn't see any incidents of health events. But what about long term? Does this change her from a 2.6 average to a 2.4 average? I don't know if we've been in it long enough to be able to answer that question even.
Where it may have it would be tied back to fertility, right? So if you look at, well, how many times do I continue to service that animal? How many attempts at breeding does that cow get? Do we give her more because the cost is less to breed this, and the value of that calf is that much, right? So if you're getting $800 for a calf versus before, for a bit there, you weren't getting anything for a Holstein bull calf, so you're being less likely to keep that cow around. So I'll defer to the economics there of how that actually works, but that you could improve that or keep that cow longer because of the improved fertility or the value of that calf that you're actually getting from that cow.
Yeah, potentially, right? So if the conception rate were to be a little higher from beef semen compared to dairy sex semen, then perhaps you could sustain the dairy cow a little bit longer, yeah. I'm not sure it makes really a big difference. Yeah, I don't think it really changes what we're doing with sexed beef.
another interesting paradigm shift with this beef on dairy model that we've never experienced before is now we're feeding dairy influenced heifers in a feedlot situation. Okay, we've never always had bull calves that we castrated at a young age and fed the steers. What do you think the value of using sex semen to produce only male beef on dairy calves? Have you done any economic analysis on that? Because there are some problems with, and now it's been a trickle down effect. In the last 18 months, there's been a major discount of heifers at the calf ranch, for example, going into the feedlot. So that's trickled down to the heifer calves being worth less as day olds.
Yeah, but we're still paying the same for them as fats. Yeah, I just told a group of producers last week, I was like, historically I've hated heifers, and everybody that knows me knows this about me. I go into a feedlot and I curse every heifer. I don't care for them. But, you look at the price differential on those calves at the wet ranch right now versus the fact that they're worth the exact same dollars on the rail.
Always had that scenario in the beef industry. The heifers have always been discounted from a parent feed efficiency standpoint, but yet they will produce one of the highest quality carcasses. So, but I'm just curious if, I mean, so you're saying we should get over it and just keep feeding the heifers, even though we have udder development, we have other management issues with those beef on dairy heifers that we've been.
So Albert wasn't here for this conversation, neither were our listeners. So part of our conversation was milk is an adulterant at the packing plant, right? And so if milk spills out of the udder and onto the carcass, then we have to trim that carcass. That's a production loss, right? And so that's where our concerns around these heifers stem from.
In the panhandle, in western Nebraska, southwest Kansas and panhandle of Texas has been the start of this. We tend to get a lot of udder development on these feedlot heifers that are beef on dairy crosses. And then they're open, but they're producing milk. And that milk is an adulterant. And so it's a major issue both at the packing and feedlot level. So
We use all the technologies that historically the dairy industry used to try to induce spontaneous lactation, right? If you go back into the 80s and the early work with progesterones and estradiol to induce a lactation without a calf, those are all the technologies we use in the feed yard to promote growth. And so we're essentially inducing spontaneous lactation without the benefit of milking the animal, right? But when I ask the packers in Pennsylvania about this, and I have pretty good relationships with them, I go onto their kill floor and I say, how does this impact, I go onto their harvest floor, how does this impact the production line? And they're like, oh, we got a guy for that, right? Or we got a girl for that. And they have somebody that's there designated to cut out udders out anyway, and so they didn't see it as a big deal.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked through all of this because I wasn't really aware that there were these sex differences, really.
Where it probably comes into play is when you start seeing a discount for that female beef calf born in the dairy. That's when you say, okay, yeah, it might be worth it then you'll start a question. Right now, if there's not a discount, it doesn't matter. You're going to use whatever's cheapest to get that cow, that dairy cow pregnant. But if you start seeing a difference there, then yeah, and which really will come from at the packing facility saying, well, are we going to give a lower price at that point? Or, how much does it really cost, the difference in cost to raise that female versus raise that male? So.
Well, and I haven't paid as close attention to the difference in the sex semen costs, right? What's the price differential to get or the fertility challenges? So we talked through fertility challenges. What's the price differential to get a bull calf from sex male semen, out of the dairy cow versus a conventional semen? I know there's an upcharge on the semen, right? I know there's some conversation about fertility differences, but I'm not dialed in the dairy industry to know enough about what those are.
No, I would say maybe we pay for sex dairy versus conventional dairy. It's maybe a $15 upcharge or so.
Is there a difference in fertility?
Yeah. I think most people would say perhaps there's a little knock on fertility for sex, but not as much anymore as we perhaps used to think. So maybe one.
But
or
is
two
that the same on the
rates.
sex male semen?
So I don't know on the sex male semen.
Because I understood the sex male semen to be a little bit more expensive and a little bit bigger knock on fertility. Maybe. I don't know.
I don't know the answer on that.
I don't know the answer to that
Okay.
either. Yeah.
But you've not done any research in that area yet.
No, we haven't looked at that because for us it has not been practical enough, right?
You forgot to include a reproductive biologist here.
Come on, Scott. We could have fit one more chair in here.
We can always get another table.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I look at these things mostly because our producers around the state or in Georgia say, hey, we got an opportunity here. Does this make sense or not? And I haven't really heard that.
So what are some of the questions you get from producers today relative to this and relative to economics?
Yeah, so I work with Allied Industry quite a bit. Can I say who that is? Yeah. So SC Genetics. I work with, I think they're very aggressive. They really think forward on how to best use these technologies. And then, I mean, we're talking about what sires to buy, how do you value traits, for example. Is the net merit the right index for us, right? And some people want to do that a little bit more customized, or so you get those are questions. And how many, what is the optimal replacement rate is a question I get too. That's really hard to really provide a good answer to, but yeah, anything, sometimes, they hear a little bit of an economic question, and they want to know what the answer is there. And sometimes there isn't a good answer. I have to tell them this, but I can do some modeling, but there's so many unknowns that we work.
Got more things to model after this.
We do. We work with a yellow cells spreadsheet, as I say, right? So okay, here's a little model, and you play as a producer or outlet industry with some. You can change some of the inputs and see how much that changes your output, for example. And we did talk about putting embryos in, for example, versus semen into cows.
I don't know if you guys noticed or not, but we've been going almost an hour, which is it's gone fast. I got to tell you, it's been very interesting. And Albert, I'm sure we didn't cover everything that's going to be presented at your presentation today, so we'll just maybe have to come back for another one sometime.
Yeah, that's correct. But I have a few more things on the slides today that we haven't really talked about.
All right. Well, good. And so that's a great reminder to the audience. We are recording these presentations, so they'll be available at balchem.com/real science. So I'd encourage you to go out there and get the full story there as well. Really want to thank you guys. This has been a great conversation. What I'd like you to do now is just kind of think of a couple things you'd like to leave our audience with, right? Things that you think they ought to know, or maybe something practical. Maybe it's something you want to look into in the future, Albert. But going to ask each of you kind of maybe share a couple comments. And Tara, why don't I start down here on the end, if that's all right?
Oh, geez, we kind of covered a lot of ground,
we
Scott.
did. Gives you a lot of choices.
Welcome to the next generation in chelated minerals. Introducing new Keysure Plus amino acid chelated minerals from Balchem. Keysure Plus delivers a higher concentration of mineral with a superior amino acid profile. The higher mineral content adds formulation flexibility, opening up space in the ration, and also reduces the carbon footprint. The superior amino acid profile delivers 28% protein from microbial biomass and reduces the amount of supplemental lysine needed in the ration. The Keysure Plus line also offers a granulated form for improved handling characteristics and reduced dust. Visit balchem.com to see how new Keysure Plus can deliver the added benefits you need to improve performance and reduce manufacturing hurdles.
I think it's interesting what Dr. Nelson said about still being focused at the dairy solely on that calving yeast question, right? Because I think on the beef side, we've really pushed to move past that. But we haven't trickled down that valuation to the dairy yet. And I think there's still to me, that signals there's still some room for growth in this area, right? There's still some room for communication between our industries and some room for improvement.
Brad, your thoughts?
Well, the last thing Dr. Felix said, communication. I thoroughly enjoyed this podcast because of the integration between the whole dairy enterprise and carrying these animals all the way to the rail, right? That's what I think we need more of this. We need more of this open dialogue to understand the needs, like Dr. Nelson and Dr. DeVries talked about fertility and calving ease. We probably didn't think that was that important anymore, right? And we want red meat yield now. But so we got to sit down and have more of these, Scott, as far as the integration between the two industries to move both industries to the highest potential level. So
Makes sense. Great comments. Corwin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a very good point on the integration, and I think that'll certainly be taking place. It is taking place, and particularly for some of these dairy producers that have a stake in how that final animal turns out, at the plant. right? So they're going to be paying attention to some of those questions and doing that. So it's starting, but it needs to take place more. There's a lot of things that we can get into in additional conversation, but the one I'd say, just a takeaway and kind of where do we go in the future and making a balance, and I think it's keeping a balanced approach, right? Not necessarily doing anything drastic. I think certainly on the price of that beef calf, we'll take it as long as we can get it, but we're not necessarily going to base our, for a dairy producer, we're not going to base our whole financial structure on that. We'll take it as long as we can get it. At the same time, you have to keep looking at what do I need to do to my main business here of dairy animals, raising that, getting the appropriate number of heifers. So keeping a balanced approach there is, I think, the way to move forward on that.
Albert, going to give you the last word.
Well, interesting discussion, right? So I think what we've talked about, sort of, from the perspective of the dairy industry, we see lots and lots of data that we have to work with, or can, right? We collect a lot of data, whether it's milk production, whether it's sensor, whether it's genetics, and we're trying to figure out how to fine-tune all this to make us the most profitable dairies, essentially, if you can. And so I see more integration. I look forward to getting data back from slaughter plants and so on, that we can fine-tune what we're doing. We're also looking into just making even better mating decisions. We focus a lot on the genetics and a little bit on the fertility and the calving yeast, but there's a lot of other things that we can sort of put into the mix to really fine-tune which heifer and cow is going to make my next generation of dairy calves, and therefore also beef calves. There's a lot of sire selection decisions left. How many heifers do we really need? When do we decide when to replace cows? Lots and lots of decisions. We're open-ended still. We're working on them, and it's sort of a fascinating time to be in the livestock industry.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I tell you, this has been enjoyable. I really appreciate it. Appreciate your expertise. Appreciate your time today, guys. You spent a lot of time with us, but it's been worth it. And to our loyal listeners, thank you for joining us once again. We hope you learned something. We hope you had some fun. We hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests. So please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.